Hi everyone, this is Mindy Egan for Honeybee Stamps, and in today's video, I'm going to be creating a thank you card with the Anchor of Hope stamp set. The supplies I picked out today is the Anchor of Hope stamp and die set, and also the mini Hexagons stencil. I was in the mood to do a little bit of coloring, so I am going to start with an 80-pound smooth weight cardstock, and I have the seashell image that I'm placing down and picking up with the door of my Misty. I'm going to rub my hand over it to really condition the stamp, get rid of any of that residual manufacturing um, stuff that just may be on it, and then I can ink it up with the intense black ink from Honeybee Stamps. I'm going to stamp it twice, make sure I have really good coverage. But because I stamped it twice, I am going to dry it with my heat tool. Sometimes when we stamp it twice, our ink can stay wet a little longer. So I want to make sure that is nice and dry so that my markers don't smear. Now, to do my coloring, I'm going to be using some markers from Altenew. I started out with this really light, kind of pale, almost teal blue. And all I'm going to do is outline the image of my seashell or the lines, the artist drawn lines on the seashell. I'm really not going to do a ton of shading on this. The main reason is I kind of wanted it to be soft. I didn't really want it to stand out or pop. I'm going to leave that for the flowers. So just adding that light teal all along those artist drawn lines. And then I will draw a shadow line with my marker around the leaves and the flowers, the ones that look like they are overlapping the seashell. If you have any of the Altenew markers, I believe this is set D, and it's just the one marker color, the lightest blue shade out of that I'm using for it. And then I'm going to move on to my flowers. So I had this vision of some pink flowers, but I didn't really want them to be super tropical. We're kind of in this in between stage right now where we're coming up to right before the holidays or right after the holidays. And even though I just wasn't really in the mood to create a winter or Christmas card, I'm not ready to jump into summery cards. But I do want to have some thank you cards in my little stash of cards because I got some gifts and I want to send some thank you cards. So I have this really nice soft pink. I think this is from the Cherry Blossom set from Altenew. I also grabbed a really, really pale pink out of the set D that I used that light blue from. Now, again, here I'm also following the artist drawn lines. I'm going to keep the shading or the darkest color to the left hand side of each of the flowers. I did bring in a super dark pink that I just barely added to. I feel like I haven't colored in a long time, so it took me a minute to kind of get into the swing of things on how I wanted to blend, how I wanted it to look. So I kind of went over some of the images a little bit to help blend that. A couple of the flowers, I didn't really do a ton of blending. It just depended on how the ink was soaking into the cardstock, how much it stood out compared to the rest of the flower. So I kind of gauged it off of that and what the ink was doing or reacting with the cardstock. So a lot of times with coloring, yes, we can follow some basic rules of shading, but a lot of times for me, it is really just kind of going with the feel of the card, how it is looking on the cardstock itself, and just kind of manipulating it from there or going with what feels best to your eye. I'm finishing off this last part, which I think is all a part of the flower. I mainly considered it the flower because it didn't really look like the rest of the leaves. So I'm using the pinks to finish that off. And then I'm going to move on to the leaves. And for that set, I am using the Green Valley collection from Altenew. These are alcohol markers. So if you have Copics, you can use that. You can use your Olo markers if that's what you had. I'm trying to spread the love throughout all of my markers. I do have a lot of markers because I like to experiment. So I'm kind of sharing the love between the markers. And I am really enjoying coloring with the artist markers. They are really geared to florals, in my opinion. So that's kind of what drew me to them right now, especially for this particular card. Now, with the leaves, I am not good at coloring leaves. So I took my darkest marker and I outlined the artist drawn lines and then blended them out with two other colors. I did the rest of the leaves off screen and I'm placing my cardstock back in my Misty tool. I had left my stamp there and I'm going to stamp back over it with that intense black ink just to really make those dark outlines really pop after all the coloring I did. And since I knew I'd be die cutting this out, I'm tucking the sentiment up in the top corner, again, conditioning that with my hand, and then inking that up with the intense black ink. I'll line up the coordinating dies and hold that all down with my Post-it tape and run that through my die cut machine. And when I do my sentiments, I kind of use the scraps that's left over on the cardstock and die cut out multiples from just plain white cardstock. And then I can layer it together to help build up dimension behind the sentiment using my tweezers and my liquid glue. For the background, I have a piece of sea glass cardstock that I think is cut to 3 1/4 by 4 1/2, and I have the mini hexagon stencil here. I started out by spraying it with the iridescent shimmer spray from Hero Arts. I sprayed it through the stencil, and then I'm drying that with my heat tool, but it really isn't as noticeable as I was hoping. Here, I'm going to bring it up to the camera to show you. There, you can see it just barely. So I thought I would kind of help intensify that a little bit. I'm bringing out some opaque texture paste, scooping a little out and just smearing this in the corners or a couple of the corners of my stencil. And this is just going to add a little bit of texture to that background. Now, you can kind of consider this a mixed media because I already have a spray down on my cardstock, and now I'm adding that texture paste over the top. It is just slightly, and I think it just really helps draw your attention into the focal image and sentiment. Now, after that's dry, I am layering this on top of another piece of heavyweight cardstock that is the same size as my panel. And then I'm also going to layer it with foam tape, especially since I did kind of that mixed media on the background. I needed to add a little bit of stability behind my cardstock. And then I can go ahead and remove the backing of that foam tape, which is going to pop it up on my card base and leave a nice white margin. Then I'm going to add my image using foam squares that I layered behind it, placing that right in the center, and then adding my sentiment with some liquid glue. And I will place something heavy on this and let it sit for about a minute or so. So if you're looking at a mixed media cards, it doesn't always have to be crazy messy and a ton of colors. It can be very subtle, such as using this wonderful stencil. I will say this is probably an amazing stencil to use with mixed media cards, but something very subtle using maybe a white paste or even a translucent paste would be great for this as well. I hope you enjoyed today's card project. Thank you so much for joining me.